Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got an upgrade video that we're going to go through here on a vintage speaker. And I want to start out by saying we get in a lot of vintage speakers of all kinds of different makes and models. And the thing about some of those early models is, well, let's just say they can be a little hit and miss. They did a lot of design work shooting from the hip back in the day because they really didn't have access to the measuring equipment that we have today. Today I can set these things up and take a whole gamut of measurements on these things within just a minute or two, and we can see things that they wish they could see that quick and easy back in the day. We can see that maybe the drivers are not quite in phase like they should be, and so we could change the order of the filter to shift phase to where they're not out of phase and they sum properly. We can see ringing or break up at the top of a woofer's curve, and we can see that, and we can say, okay, let's go in and damp that out. Let's put a notch filter there, or let's put a higher order filter there, and let's get that out of it, and a whole bunch of things that we can easily see and address, impedance mismatches, you name it, that they just didn't have the ability to look at back at that time. And then during the time this speaker was built, there was some measuring equipment available from what I can understand, but not like what we have today, not computer-based measurement systems. So usually when that vintage stuff comes in, we see problems, and we know things that they didn't know back then because we've built on the knowledge of everybody else, and we're at a different level now. And we know that a large surface area around a driver is going to cause surface reflections, that sharp edges are going to cause diffraction. There's a whole bunch of things that we can know from experience that they didn't have back then because they didn't have the experience. And when they're tweaking something by ear and they're listening to it, they don't have the references that we have today. We can look at a speaker and say this speaker is completely flat, neutral, and is a good reference to compare other speakers to as far as neutrality. And if we were designing something based on listening impressions only and we were tuning it by ear, at least we'd have a reference of knowing what's accurate and what's not accurate. Back then, they just had to listen to maybe music played live and then try to replicate what they think they hear based on how they think it should sound. So it was a lot more difficult back in the day. So when we see a vintage speaker come in and it measures pretty well, then that's usually a surprise to us because usually we find issues. In this case, this speaker measured pretty well. This speaker, the Morton Short Festival 3 is the model, and I hope I said the name of this company correctly. They're an English company. They've been around for a really long time, and from what I can tell, this speaker may have been produced late 70s, early 80s, so keep that in mind. The owner of the speaker said he's had these since 1985, so they've served him pretty well for a long time. Now, cabinet-wise, particle board, no bracing. Small box though, but still fairly hollow. We know that there are going to be resonance issues with these panels and things like that. Drivers-wise, pretty nice woofer. This is a little stamped steel frame. Yes, it's gonna ring a little. You could put a little damping material on the frame to damp out some of the ringing, but it's a nice paper-based cone. It's a treated paper cone, reversed surround on this thing, and it has the Morton Short stamp on here, a sticker on here showing that it was one of their drivers. There's not much information on the tweeter. There's a little bit of information there as far as a part number. May have been one of their tweeters as well. Nice little soft dome tweeter. The drivers themselves did not look as if they were causing any problems that needed to be corrected. Crossover wise, this little crossover is mounted in the bottom of this thing, and yes, it is kind of cheesy. What's funny is they've got some connectors that take only banana plugs that you shove a banana plug into, and it did not have any ferrous material on it. However, some of the crossover did. There's some ferrous steel leads on the caps and a little bit of ferrous material there, of course, in the sandcast resistor. There's some iron core inductors there, and this one is actually a little air core inductor that's on the tweeter. Yes, this is just kind of a push-on circuit, PVC jacketed wire, push-on connector. Sure, this wire is probably completely oxidized by now. It also runs through a small fuse, which is kind of crazy, but the whole thing runs through a fuse, not what you want your signal going through. But back then they thought, hey, that's a way to protect the speaker in case somebody abuses it. And it goes into clipping of an amplifier. It'll burn that up, hopefully, before doing any damage to the drivers. Of course, now we kind of know, hey, we can hear that distortion. The amp is clipping, turn it down. You kind of have to have some common sense with anything that we use today. Now, the speaker had a bottom on it here, and we've pulled this sock down around it. It's fitted around it, and once you put this on, you pull this sock back up, and it goes around the speaker, and it goes underneath this top panel here, and then this top panel goes down over it. So the whole thing is just covered in a sock. And it actually wasn't that detrimental to the sound. I measured it with and without the sock, and it actually measured really well. Let's take a look at this. First of all, let's take a look at the measured frequency response on tweeter axis. And you can see, not bad. There's a pretty good little dipped area there between like 1200 hertz and 3000 hertz. There's a little bit of a dip. Now, we notice that as we moved up to the level of the port, that response smoothed out a little bit. We're getting into a range where the drivers are more in phase with the woofer a little bit further away. So let's look at that frequency response measurement. And now we're only looking at a slight dip just above 2 kHz. That's not bad. I mean, considering the time period that this speaker was designed and what they were able to do with it with really decent drivers, I'm going to say this speaker has really good bones, okay? It's got something to work with. Nice drivers. The box, sure, you could add a little bracing, add some no-res, you can fix the box. And of course, yes, it had some limitations here as far as quality of parts, but everything back then compared to what we have now is a pretty big difference when it comes to quality of parts. You know, we have really high purity copper, really high quality capacitors, resistors have come up a long way. I mean, everything that goes into a speaker, there are higher performance variations compared to what was going on back then. Even with electrolytic caps, they even tended to drift a little and could get a little more out of spec or something like that because of their age. A lot of these parts will age. So even if they did a great job, which they did, there's still a huge amount of room for improvement by just upgrading the parts quality. And that's exactly what I would recommend for this speaker. Just going through this thing and doing a complete parts upgrade. Why reinvent the wheel? Why go in and for me to redesign everything? They've designed it in a way that measures pretty accurately, and that's their house sound, for instance. That's the way they sent it out. Very accurate. So they're not coloring it in some way. The tweeter's not playing 3 or 4 dB louder than it's supposed to be or anything like that. They did a great job. But it was also built in the late 70s, early 80s. So even if this was really high-end parts for the time, there's still a big jump in performance by going to just newer, fresher parts that aren't oxidized. And in this case, there's still a lot of room for improvement just by going to air core inductors, all poly caps, get a good resistor in there, new wiring, tube connectors that can be mounted right on the back of this thing real easily, things like that. This could easily be taken up several levels, and that's exactly what I recommend. Before I finish up, let's look at the rest of the measurements because they did a really good job. Horizontal off-axis looks fine. It's dipping out a little heavier there, around 2500 hertz compared to the rest, but that's great. Vertical off-axis, we're going up 4 inches per measurement at 1 meter, and we're seeing that the drivers stay in phase over a pretty good range. So that's impressive. So in other words, they designed this crossover to keep the drivers in phase over a wide range, which is going to give you a pretty even room response. Spectral decay. All things considering that the surface reflections and the sharp edges are going to cause some things there in the spectral decay to carry out a little bit longer there. You can see it, what looks like really resonance. It really may not be resonance. I'm looking at what I'm seeing here is maybe more indicative of surface reflections than anything. And overall, not bad at all. Impedance, pretty even all the way across. Impedance doesn't do anything crazy. It's actually tuned pretty low with this little port here. It's tuned to 28 hertz. And the minimal impedance dip was 5.9 ohms. So, man, a pretty easy load all the way across. Again, why would I go in and redesign this thing? This is one of those speakers that if you own this thing, and if you can measure the inductance of the coils, then you can go in and replicate this crossover value for value with high quality parts and really restore this speaker. And that's exactly what I'm going to recommend for this customer. I'm going to take these inductors and I'm going to pull one leg off of the circuit board here so that I can take a measurement on it, measure the inductors. There's just 2 caps and a resistor. I'm going to provide this customer with a handful of new high quality parts that they can build on a new board, point to point wire. It's going to be bigger, but there's enough room in the bottom of this cabinet for a much bigger board to mount. You'll have to run some new wiring out to some tube connectors that we can mount on this thing somehow or another. You're going to have to get a little bit creative with mounting some of this stuff, but all in all, this is a really easy speaker to upgrade. And the results should take this old vintage speaker and make it really competitive with any of the newer models that you see out there, even several thousands of dollars that you see, because a lot of those new speakers that you see out there, they may be several $1,000s, but the parts quality isn't any better than what this came with from the factory. We see cheesy parts put in things up to $6,000 and $8,000 a pair. I could start naming company names easily. So there's a good chance this could be taken up to levels that really outperform a lot of modern speakers for not much money. So it's definitely one to keep your eye out for. If you see these coming up in the used market for next to nothing, might be a really good buy because it's definitely got the good bones. You can go in and upgrade these things and really turn it into a pretty nice speaker. It measured pretty well. It just needed a little help right here, and you're done. Great little speaker. Great job from Morton Short. And I didn't know that much about the company. I looked up some stuff on the internet, and just to give you guys a little information, because I didn't know this company real well. Morton Short, and again, I hope I'm saying this name correctly. I don't know. Is a British audio company with a long history of producing speakers. It was founded in 1967 by Norman Morton and Rodney Short. The company is known for well-regarded speakers which have ranged in price from budget-friendly to high-end over the years. Morton Short has been involved in several acquisitions and changes in ownership, including being acquired by TGI PLC in 1987, which also owned Tannoy and Goodman's loudspeakers. In 1999, Audio Partnership PLC acquired the company. So just a little bit of a brief history there. I don't know if these founding guys are still around, but I will definitely give you guys a thumbs up. For the design work that you did on this little speaker, you did a great job. See, there's speakers that come in that I do like when they've actually been designed well. So that's it for this one, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.